Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Jaclyn Siano. I'm a client director here at Inspired Instruction, and I'm so excited that you're joining us today for our monthly webinar. This month's topic is all about data and PLCs. So it's titled PLCs That Work, Turning Data into Impact. And just so you know, I do have my colleague Anne-Marie Lawrence on here with me. So if you do have any questions as we go forward, you absolutely can type them into the webinar chat and we can answer those. And in addition to that, and once the webinar is over within the next few days, you will be getting a handout that will have all the resources that I referenced today. And then the recording for this webinar will be on our website as well if you want to rewatch it or share. So again, I'm Dr. Jaclyn Siano, and I'm very excited that you're here this afternoon with us. All right, so our agenda for this webinar, like I said, we're going to be talking about data and how we can use it in PLCs. So I kind of separated this into 4 sections: setting the stage, using data as a foundation, structuring collaboration purposefully, and then a blueprint for sustainability. So let's dive into setting the stage. So I'm going to do a quick little poll, and I want you to think about your teachers in your school or district. And I want you to think about how would you rate them? And there should be a little poll that popped up on your screen. So would you rate your teachers in your school district, majority of them, as more of a data denial, which means they really distrust data and avoid using it, data indifferent, they don't care about the data, we have no need for it, data informed, meaning that they use it when it supports their own opinions or decisions, or do you feel like your teachers are very data driven, which means they're using it to shape and inform their decisions? So I see lots of people clicking an answer. Awesome. I'll give you about 10 more seconds, and then I'll share what we got. All right, so it looks like we're kind of all over the board. We have, majority of you, about 80 something percent, are in the middle between data indifferent and data informed. We do have some that believe that their teachers are data denial, and then we do have some that believe that their teachers are data driven. So that's good. I'm hoping wherever you fall on the scale, you'll be able to gain some new strategies today, and you'll be able to, take some stuff back to your teachers, to your PLCs, and use it to improve your processes. All right, so let's talk about the 4 building blocks of effective data-driven instruction. So we know that, when we're sitting in PLCs or when we're planning lessons, we're planning activities, we should be using student data to drive those instructions, and to kind of drive the direction of where we want to go. So there's research that basically shows that you can break down data-driven instruction into 4 blocks. Assessment, which means creating assessments that will provide you with meaningful data. Analysis, which means taking the results of those assessments and then using the analysis to identify the causes of both the strengths and the shortcomings. Action, meaning you're teaching effectively what students most need to learn based on the assessment results. And then culture, which means we are creating an environment in which data-driven instruction can survive and thrive. So those are kind of the 4 building blocks, and everything I talk about today, you're going to see relates to at least one, if not more, of those blocks. So when we think about setting the stage, we want to think about creating a data-driven school culture. We want to make sure that we have created a place where, especially if you're more in like the data indifferent, data denial zone, where teachers understand not only the importance of data, but feel they understand that it is important to you as an administrator, important to your school culture. So how do we do that? How do we build a data-driven school culture? Step 1 is definitely creating teacher buy-in. And I think that's important with anything. If you're new to PLCs, if you've been doing PLCs for a long time, if you're trying to change the overall culture of your PLCs, you have to explain to teachers the how and the why. So hopefully a bunch of the stuff I talk about today is stuff you can bring back to the teachers and say, hey, this is the how and the why we should be using data in our PLCs. We want to make sure we're providing initial training about not just PLC processes, but also why data. How do we use it? What kind do we use? And then what do we do when we get into a PLC and we have our data with us? What happens next? Because we can't assume that teachers necessarily know what to do with it. We want to focus on growth. We always want to make sure that as school administrators, district administrators, we're creating a safe environment that we can share data and PLCs and nobody's going to be blamed or criticized. So yes, you gave a pre-assessment and everyone did great, and then you gave the actual assessment and everybody did really poorly. I think teachers really need to understand that that's not a necessary reflection on them fully, and that we're not placing blame. We want to take that data from that failed assessment and then use it to move forward and to grow. We want to keep it simple. Data can be scary, especially if you're in that data denial, data indifferent phase, where if we get too much data, teachers can shut down and not want to do anything with it because it's just going to be overwhelming. So we keep it simple. We can start with a handful of types of data and then kind of build until we get into that culture where we understand the importance of all of it. Establishing a support network. I think this is really important. If you have instructional leaders or administrators, vice principals, people who can be trained to assist teachers and get them excited about using the data. How do we teach anything? We model it. If I'm in the classroom and I want to teach my students how to write an essay, I'm going to model it. If mathematics, we're going to model it. Same thing goes with teachers. We want to make sure we're modeling the behavior. So I think training a internal team, and whether that means that they get outside training, they get internal training, whatever it happens to be, this group of leaders, whether they're admin, teachers, a mix of both, is able to assist the entire team of teachers and push that importance of the data-driven school culture. And then, as I mentioned, we want to model it. Hold regular meetings with those team leaders, give them the processes that we want them to model when they're with teachers in their PLCs. Again, it only becomes important to the rest of the school and the rest of the district if they see it from a top-down approach. So that means administrators are involved in the process. They're attending PLCs, they're training their team leaders, they're training their teachers. Everybody across the board is getting the same message that this is important. So using data as a foundation. So when we think about PLCs, we do a lot of work with PLCs. We do PLC coaching, we do PLC workshops, trainings. A lot of times what we see, and sometimes these are in districts that they've been using PLCs for a long time, teachers get into their PLC groups and then don't know what to do. And I think one of the important things is, I've seen it, where we say, okay, you bring your data to the PLC. They don't know what to bring and they don't know what to do with it once they get there. So I think making sure that we're using data as a foundation for our PLCs, and again, stressing the importance, is really, really huge. And it, again, promotes that. Why are we doing this? Well, because it's important and there's lots of different types of data we can use and there's lots of different things we can do with it. So I think knowing that it's not just standardized test scores that we're bringing to these PLCs, we want them to use all the data they have at their disposal without overwhelming them. Not saying bring 27 types of data to every PLC meeting, but just knowing there's a variety of stuff they can bring and they can be using during their PLCs. So I do love this quote: without data, all we have is an opinion. So what I want to talk about next is the different types of data that you could be encouraging your teachers to bring and analyze in their PLCs. So standardized test scores, super important. I get that. We are in a nation that standardized test scores really do dictate a lot of what we do in the classroom. So that's important. I'm not saying ignore the standardized test scores. I'm just saying it doesn't have to be every PLC meeting does not need to be revolving around standardized tests. There's lots of different types of data they can be bringing. Formative assessment and student work samples are always my favorite. Stuff that reflects social emotional learning of the students, and then stuff that reflects the behavior and engagement of the students. These are all types of data. It doesn't have to be just a test. It can be a whole variety of things. So formative assessment data, there's all different types of formative assessment data. It doesn't have to be a traditional traditional quiz or, anything like that. It can be entry and exit slips. Those were always my favorite to analyze in PLCs as a teacher, because I think the exit slips especially gave me a really good understanding of what my students walked away or didn't walk away with. I used to sit in my dining room at the end of a day and take all my exit slips from the day and spread them out in the dining room table and group them. I taught high school, I'll group them by class and figure out, okay, what are we missing? Who's missing what class needs what focus? So there's definitely lots of different things you can do. And something like a student observation sheet that you see up here on the slide, really simple. You put your students' names, you put the date. What was it? It was an exit slip. It was an interview assessment. It was a thumbs up, thumbs down. And you can easily keep track of who's getting it and who's not getting it. And that kind of data, bringing that observation sheet with you, can be really helpful during a PLC. We want to look at the big picture, right? Formative assessment data, student work, really important. That's stuff, tangible stuff that you can bring to the table and say, here, 80% of my students did this, 40% of my students didn't get this. But we also have to look at the whole child. We have to look at the fact that we have the academic stuff, but we also have to look at other factors. We know that students nowadays, they have a lot of different things going on. So we have to look at the social emotional factors, and that can be done through observations, through surveys, through exit slips, self-awareness forms, self-assessments. Behavior and engagement. Were they absent 4 times in the past month? And maybe that's why they're not doing well. Are they very sleepy in class? Things like that. Are they not paying attention? We have to look at the big picture. And I think that's important because a lot of times teachers that I work with, they come in with a test or a quiz and then they just work on that. But you have to look at whole child. What was happening with that child that week? What was happening the past month? So we really want to try to combine looking at academic, SEL, behavior, looking at all of it, because it really does provide a more complete, equitable picture of the whole child. So I think once you get if you have data indifferent or data denial teachers over the hump of data is not scary and it is really important, definitely encourage them to bring different types of data in to kind of look at big picture. So these 5 students did not perform well on this assessment. Let's look at the behavior engagement SEL pieces, because maybe I have observations or anecdotal notes, and kind of put it all together and say, okay, well, why? What is the root cause? And that's a great activity for a PLC. Something like an academic monitoring tool, and this is one of the resources that you're going to get. I mentioned if you came in late, I mentioned at the beginning, after this webinar, you will get an email over the next few days with a resource sheet. This is one of the resources linked in there. So there are definite ways to kind of monitor all the things at the same time. So something like an academic monitoring tool like this one happens to be for small group instruction, where you absolutely can walk from group to group, use your key. This person needs support. This person is showing proficiency, but also make yourself some notes about, falling asleep on the desk, was absent, stuff like that. And then you have a single sheet as a teacher that you can bring to a PLC that can help support that whole child perspective. And I like the fact that if you have, spaces like that, you can use a key for numbers for the actual standard or the academic piece, but then you also have space to put in anecdotal notes for SEL, behavior, or engagement. And it does give you a nice big picture. All right, so data using PLCs ask 4 questions. So we get teachers to the PLC and, they've brought some kind of data with them, and whether it's a formative assessment, student work, an observation sheet, now we have to teach them, what do we do? What do we do with this information that we have in front of us? So research says, there's really 4 main questions we should be asking ourselves as a group when we're looking at the data. 1, which students were not able to demonstrate proficiency, right? That's going to help teachers in a PLC identify by name and by need. These are the kids who are struggling and why. They can look at the data and circle. They can use a shared Google Doc. They can use a spreadsheet. And you're not just looking at whether or not the student's answer was correct, but kind of looking at the nature of it. Where did the error come from? What is that root cause? And then you also obviously want to ask, okay, which students are highly proficient? Because those are the kids, when we're thinking about differentiation, which is one of the great things that comes out of data-driven PLCs is what can I do to accelerate those students' learnings? So if there are students who are consistently demonstrating above average, advanced proficiency, would they benefit from working with peers on learning tasks that are, match their proficiency level? So we're not only looking for the students who didn't do well and who need support, we're also looking for our students where they would benefit from some kind of enrichment. So inquiry-based projects, collaborative problem solving, independent work. So those are the first two, who cannot demonstrate proficiency and who is, consistently highly proficient. And then then we can start strategizing, what do we do for those students? Now, again, we're in a PLC, so we're talking to our colleagues. Did one of my colleagues have excellent results in a place where my students struggled? One of the benefits of PLCs is the collaboration between colleagues. What can I learn from my colleagues to improve my individual practice? And that's really important that as we're promoting that data-driven PLC culture, that it is a safe place for teachers to communicate without feeling judged. So I feel comfortable as a teacher sitting down and saying, hey, your kids just took a formative assessment on the same standard my kids did. My kids bombed it. Your kids did great. What did you do differently than I did? Because we know sometimes teaching can feel like an island, and having a PLC where you can bounce ideas off of and use data as the focus, as the core, is crucial for teacher and student growth. And then another question we can ask, is there an area where none of us achieved what we expected? So we all gave a formative assessment on the same standard and nobody did well. What can we learn from that? What skill are we missing? Maybe we go back to the standard, we unpack it. What piece are we not teaching as thoroughly as we should be? So this would be a great thing to kind of hand out to teachers and say, here are the 4 key questions you can be asking when you are using data in your PLCs. And it's a nice starting point, especially if you're at the beginning end of really integrating data into PLCs. Consultancy is also one of my favorite strategies for sharing data, and this is one of the resources also that you will get. Basically, you have one person be like the focus person for that PLC, and they give a quick overview of the student work. This is, the assessment I gave, or this is the, writing assignment. They give a quick like, hey, these are my major concerns. This is what I want to share out. And then the group takes a second, they look at the student work after the teacher has given their little mini explanation. And the group really asks some clarifying questions. And they can be brief, like yes or no, like, did you do this? Did they struggle with this? What about the last assessment? And then they ask more specific questions to the presenter. And now we want them to really clarify, as a teacher, their methods. And let's really do some deeper analysis as to why we don't think the students did well or they did do well on this assessment. And then the group kind of talks to each other about, related issues. This is what I saw in my classroom. I feel like I'm still missing this information. They can give feedback on, hey, I see that question 5 is a little like strangely worded. Maybe this is the reason it tripped kids up. And then the presenter kind of comes, it's kind of a back and forth. And then if obviously, depending on how long your PLC is, that whole process takes about 25 minutes. If you have an hour-long PLC, you can have 2 teachers present every PLC, but it really does put the data at the center of it, and it gives them a very clear structure, as opposed to just saying, here, bring your data to your PLC and analyze it. So this is just one way, again, if your teachers are hesitant to use data, this is one way to kind of integrate it more clearly. Short cycle monitoring and tracking the results. So again, we can get through the data analysis, and then becomes the question of, well, what do we do now? Now I have the data, I see where the kids did well, I see where they didn't do well, what happens next? So with short cycle monitoring, it's all about collecting and analyzing data frequently. So you're not waiting till the summative assessment. You're using all those types of formative assessments and behavior and engagement tracking and SEL tracking that we mentioned before. So it's all about the quick feedback loop, right? So I can respond in real time. So something like this, an action plan results analysis, you can look at your formative assessment an exit slip, for example, and say, okay, what standard needs to be retaught? Why didn't those kids master that standard or didn't retain it? And then what strategies am I as a teacher going to use to address these standards? And this is something that as a PLC group, each teacher can add to one of the lines. Look at a recent formative assessment. What standard needs to be retaught? Why didn't they do well? Maybe they used the consultancy activity to kind of do the analysis piece. And then as a whole group, plan for what am I going to do next? Sometimes it's just a lack of mastery of the standard because we didn't go in depth enough. Sometimes maybe there was a lot going on. The kids, maybe they had a field trip the day before and we just, it just wasn't conducive. Whatever the root cause was, it's important to find out what that root cause is. And then most importantly, work with your PLC team to figure out what can I do next. All right, structuring our collaboration purposely. And we know that when we're in PLC groups, there's always going to be something, right? Maybe these two teachers don't really get along very well. Maybe there's only 3 people in the PLC and then 2 of them are absent, or one of them's absent. So we want to think about the actual structure of our PLCs and how can we take those building blocks of every PLC and make them data centered. So when we're talking about that, we're talking about our norms, our roles, our agendas, and our protocols. How can we take these 4 basic things that happen in PLCs anyway and make them data centered? So number 1, with norms, we know it's a best practice that all PLCs have norms, that they're shared in the beginning of every meeting, they're revised as necessary, they're agreed upon, they're positive. It's basically like our rules for if we're going to be an effective PLC, we need to do A, B, C, and D. We can absolutely encourage our teachers to add data language to their norms. So it can be something like, bring some type of data to every meeting. That could be a norm. Or be prepared to share root causes of data. If we encourage PLCs to add something about data language, something with data language to their group norms, again, it's showing the importance of data and really embedding it into our PLC process. Same thing with roles. We know best practice for PLCs is that we have roles for each person and that they change regularly. So the same person's not the recorder every time, the same person's not the timekeeper every time. But I think making sure that you have a variety of roles, and especially ones that, for example, like the resource manager, like this person is in charge of making sure that we have all our necessary materials. So making sure that if we're analyzing whatever assessment this day, maybe this person has make sure that A, everybody's bringing their data to the meeting, sending out a reminder email, or B, bringing the standards that are associated with those assessments so that they have a physical copy in front of them. So, promoting the fact that yes, we want all PLCs to have roles, but maybe rewording them. You could have a data manager. I've seen PLCs do that where one of the roles is data manager. That person's role is to make sure that, like I said, everybody comes with their data and is ready to, print out whatever they need, standards, they need copies of the state test exemplars, whatever it happens to be. So feel free to change the names of roles so that they are more data centered. Your agenda. Absolutely, whatever your district or school agenda looks like, you absolutely can encourage PLCs to always have some kind of data in their list of materials. So that can be a requirement. If you require that your teachers submit their agendas or their notes at the end of every PLC, which I know a lot of districts do require that, when you present this to them, again, we're trying to push the fact that our PLCs are going to be data driven. So we want to make sure that data is included somewhere on everybody's agenda and everybody's notes. This is not only best practice, but you can make it required. And again, is really pushing the fact that data is important and we want you to use it in every single PLC. With protocols, we have to remember, and I mentioned it before, modeling and teaching how to work with data is super important. Can't expect teachers to necessarily know what to do when they bring data anywhere to a PLC, a faculty meeting, whatever it happens to be. So something like this, which is a data protocol, teaching them the steps. What do I do when I bring data? So maybe you don't like the consultancy model. That's okay. Come up with some kind of school or district protocol. And this is a sample, and this is one of the resources that you'll get that says, okay, when you bring data to a meeting, this is what we do. Step one, what's the purpose of the meeting? We review our norms. Step two, let's talk about the assessment itself. And you can make your own. You can take this or you can modify it to meet your needs. Maybe this is what your teachers use as an agenda for their PLCs, and they modify it every week of what data did they actually use, what were their responses, what were their answers, what did they come up with. And I think it's really important, again, that you teach, explicitly teach teachers how to embed data into their PLCs. Because again, we'd love to say like, here, go analyze this. But it's the same thing. If I tell my students here, go do this, and I didn't teach it or model it for them, they're going to struggle. So anytime we can give a visual or a clear training or clear expectations to teachers, I think it relieves a little bit of their anxiety, but it also guarantees that everyone's on the same page in the same playbook. So sustainability, that's always the tough part, right? We can present all these things, we can train teachers on all these things, but how do we make sure that it continues, that teachers don't see it as, oh, this is just an initiative and it'll be gone in a week, or this isn't important. So besides the fact, as I mentioned in the beginning, we're trying to build a culture of data-driven responsibility. So you're promoting that culture, but what else can we do to make everyone know this is the importance of data in PLCs? This is why we want our instructional decisions to be data-based. What can we do to sustain this process? So again, with the modeling, I know I've said it a few times, but modeling and promoting the PLC cycle. So we start off, and all of the resources that you're going to be getting in the handout towards the end of the week, they all really say this in different terms. What was the plan? What was I hoping to achieve when I assigned this assignment or gave this assessment? Create a SMART goal or an action plan. What's going to happen next? Implement those strategies in the classroom and then check for progress. How am I going to determine if the students have successfully achieved those outcomes? Analyze those results again. And then what actions do we take if they don't attain them? And what actions do we take if they do attain them? And those insights lead to the action, and we just do the cycle all over again. So if you think about it in terms of a PLC, we come to the PLC with our data, whatever it happens to be. We go through the analysis phase that we talked about previously, whether that's consultancy, whether that is the data protocol. And now we say, okay, we've looked at the data. We know who did well, who didn't do well. Now let's reassess. What do I want when I reteach this? What are my anticipated learning outcomes for the students? What do I need them to be able to do? Create an action plan or a SMART goal, implement my new strategies that hopefully came from some collaboration with my colleagues, think about what's success going to look like, analyze the results, and then figure out if we need to repeat the cycle. And I think modeling and promoting a cycle doesn't have to exactly look like this. It can be your own district version. It can be your own school version. But having some kind of visual of what this inquiry PLC cycle should look like really does help guide teachers so they don't just say, okay, I know my students did poorly on this standard. Now what? Because the now what is the part of the sustainability. What do we do next? And then how do we know when it's time to start the cycle over? And really, we're looking at, we want the teachers to collaborate, but we don't want them just to sit there and complain about things, right? Oh, these kids did terrible on this test. No, we want them to be able to focus on specific measurable outcomes. And using that cycle makes it very specific. I'm looking to reteach this standard or this idea because my students did not perform as well as I wanted them to. And now here's my plan. I'm going to implement it. We're going to reassess. And then I'm going to determine, did they meet my objective or not? So it makes it very, very specific, but it also makes it very data-centered. It also promotes continuous improvement rather than like, oh, this is just a one and done. We're going to analyze our state test scores and that's it. It becomes part of the PLC rhythm. It's part of your cycle. This is just what you do in every PLC. It encourages evidence-based decision-making. So instead of relying on just my opinion or just my intuition of, oh, maybe they did poorly because, we had a field trip the day before, or maybe they did poorly because, they didn't understand the text. You're looking at evidence-based decision-making, not just guessing. And then it builds teacher capacity. They're able to do this over and over again. Once they go through a few of the cycles and they understand that this is the norm, this is what we are doing in our PLCs. We are using a cycle based on data. Then they become more independent. They're able to do it. It becomes just like lesson planning or anything else as a teacher. When you first do it, it takes you a long time. You struggle. The more you practice, the more it becomes part of your PLC rhythm, where you're just, this is what I do as a teacher. It really helps improve everybody's instructional practice, and it becomes much less scary. Now, if we're thinking from an administrator point of view, there are specific conditions that, you guys can definitely promote and to help your PLCs succeed, especially when we're looking at data. One, we want to make sure that, again, like I mentioned, every teacher, every PLC is getting the same message. Data is the core of our PLC. Data is important. It should be driving all of our instructional decisions. We want to collaborate in PLCs not solely, but mostly based on data and not opinion. So first thing we need to do is make sure there are clear purpose and priorities for PLCs in your school or district. We want to make sure they have access to resources that help them make informed decisions. So whether you use iReady and you want them to use that data, whether you want to print everybody out one of those observation tools that I showed you before and say, here, I want you to use this for your next PLC, just making sure they have access to what they need. Making sure that you're engaging them, that they're establishing benchmarks. What do they want the progress to look like over the course of a month, 3 months, a trimester, the year? Ensuring that they have relevant and timely data. And I know sometimes that's hard, especially if you're waiting for like state data. Sometimes it takes a long time. But again, having them know that there's always data at their disposal means that we're not just waiting for data to be released. There's always something I can be bringing to that PLC, whether again, it's formative assessment, it's behavior-based, it's SEL-based, and making sure they know that they have relevant and timely data at their disposal at all times. And then providing training, support, and resources. And like I mentioned multiple times during this webinar, we cannot expect teachers to just know what to do when they get into a PLC with data. We have to model, we have to train. If you can build an internal team to help support, if you can bring in outside training on how to do, how to use data effectively, anything that gets everybody on the same plane, speaking the same language is super helpful. And then as administrators, you want to get involved. I'm not saying it's possible for you to attend every single PLC. It's not. I know lots of schools that, they designate one person to each PLC group and then they rotate. But we know that when teachers see administrators involved in their PLCs, there's lots of different benefits. It increases teacher effectiveness and morale, increases their feelings of support, and improves interpersonal trust. There's a sense of shared leadership. There's research that suggests that it improves overall school climate, all because it boosts open communication and collaboration. So as an administrator, your role should be to participate as a group member, not to formally observe those PLCs. You want to go in and be an active participant. And again, if you bring data as well, whatever that happens to be, maybe you pull iReady data from a class, and you're getting involved and you're showing the importance that, look, even I, as your supervisor, your principal, whatever your role happens to be, even I'm going to sit down with my data and analyze it with you and go through that PLC cycle. Oops, I apologize. I went one too far. There we go. And then we definitely want to, as administrators, celebrate PLC growth and success. One of my favorite activities, it's called the Yay of the Day. And this is definitely something where, once your PLCs are going through these cycles, when they're really involved in looking at the data, they're going to have success. They are. So asking them to share those successes, Might be after reteaching a standard my students performed poorly on, assessment scores went up 48%. That's a huge win. So one of the resources you'll be getting is this sheet, and it's basically a cutout where you ask teachers at the end of their PLCs once a month at a faculty meeting to share their yay of the day, but have it centered around data. Tell them it has to be centered around data or around PLC work. And then you can share them out. You can share them out via email, you don't have to put their names. You can share it out during a faculty meeting. But all of this just proves and shows your ongoing support for a data-driven PLC culture. All right, so let's recap all the fun things we talked about during this session. I do appreciate y'all joining me today. We want to promote a data-driven culture. We want to use multiple modes of data in our PLCs: academic, SEL, engagement, and behavior-based. We want to make sure we are asking the right questions. As teachers in a PLC, are we asking the right questions about our data? We want to track and analyze our results. We want to structure our norms, roles, agendas, and protocols around the data. And that's probably going to come from the top down. That's where you as an administrator is going to have to kind of really help in formatting what does that look like. We want to teach and model the inquiry cycle or the PLC cycle so we know, now that we've analyzed this data, what do we do with it next? And as administrators, we want to get involved so that we set the tone, we model, we show everyone this is what we want our PLCs to look like, and this is why data is important. We want to celebrate those successes and that growth that they are absolutely going to have. Well, thank you so much for joining me today for these past 40 minutes. I really hope you have gained some helpful information on how to make your PLCs more data-driven. What I am going to ask you to do, and I'm going to put it in the chat right now, I do have a quick survey because it is really important to us here at Inspired Instruction that we are hitting our mark and making sure that the information we are providing is helpful. So if you could just take a minute to fill that out, it's only a few questions. I always appreciate the feedback. As I mentioned, a resource handout will be emailed to you within the week with links to the resources that I showed and mentioned today. The recording for this workshop will be available on our website in the same place that you signed up over the next few days. And if you do need support with your PLCs, we provide PLC coaching, PLC workshops. We do modeling, we do demo, like gradual release model type stuff. Lots of different districts we're working with right now to support their PLCs. And even if you feel like the PLC process is okay, maybe the teachers just need support on how to analyze data, we do that too. So I would love to hear from you. I hope you found this helpful. And as I mentioned, I hope you can take a minute to fill out our form. Thank you so much. I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their week.